Thanks, guys, for that carrier update. Back here with Mike Baudendistel, head of Intermodal Solutions, but also the writer of the Stockout newsletter and host of the Stockout show. Mike, how you doing?
Doing well, yeah. Good time to be in Dallas.
Good time as well. Let's talk a little bit about Tyson, and they've had some cuts here recently, and how this affects CPG overall.
Yeah, so the news on Tyson last week was last Wednesday, their CEO, Donnie King, sent a letter to employees. I think they're saying they're going to cut 10% of the corporate jobs and 15% of cut 50% of the senior leadership positions. And so it's 124,000 employees of the company. 6,000 of those are corporate employees. So call it 600 jobs. I don't think the job cuts include the CFO who couldn't find his house that one time. But anyway, they also have this sort of reorganization of the workforce. They're moving around certain roles, et cetera. They had also announced previously earlier in the year that they're closing their Illinois and South Dakota offices, saying employees could relocate down to Arkansas. Hopefully there weren't a lot of people who relocated down to Arkansas only to have their jobs cut. But what I found interesting about this was really that, most companies in the CPG industry, I mean, as I've described the last few weeks on this show, are really doing well right now. I mean, most CPG companies, you go through their earnings results, most of them are better than expectations. Most of them are seeing margin improvement from where they were, last year. They're really sort of turning a corner there. The elasticities are low, so consumers really aren't cutting back on food products for the most part. Packaged food products are still hanging in there. I think they're cutting back on other things. A lot of these supply chain issues have been kind of resolved. Not hearing a lot about supply chain issues in CPG. So that's helping both with on-shelf rates and sales volumes as well as costs. Like even Mondelez last week said it's their best quarter ever. So for the most part, CPGs are really doing well. I think these meat processing companies are really a different beast. They have just sort of different dynamics. Some of the things that the meat processors are struggling with are higher costs for things like live cattle, live hogs. The chick rates for the chickens are below where they needed to be for a long time, and it's really been a reversal of fortunes for the meat processors. I mean, because the other thing that goes into that is they have seen some sales volume declines and some consumers going from higher cuts of meat to lower cuts of meat, and just really kind of a reversal of fortunes from what they saw early in the pandemic, where early in the pandemic, let's say 2020 into 2021, these meat processors, including Tyson, were really firing on all cylinders, had outsized profits. They were taking prices up 20 to 40%, depending on what type of meat it was. Profit margins were really sort of high levels. They were, unsustainably high, historically high. And it caused the Biden administration to launch this investigation, basically, where they basically alleged that the reason grocery prices were inflating so much is that so much of that was driven by the meat processors, because the meat processing industry was too concentrated, because you have 4 companies that control 80 or 85% of the meat processing, and it was not competitive. And the administration actually invested $1 billion in independent meat companies to try to create a little bit more, competition there. So Tyson's stock went from $60 to $100. Now it's back down to $60, bounced a little bit. Now it's at 62. So it's been one of these sort of COVID round trips, if you will. And, they've sort of fallen on more difficult times. You look at this most recent quarter in February, their profitability was down 70%. There's been a glut of protein in certain categories. You have the trading down, and just really, but really it's been almost more on the margin side than on the sales volume side. And really it's the, cost for, live cattle have increased, cutting into their margins, and it doesn't seem like they can really pass those along as easily as they did, earlier in the pandemic. So really, the meat processor is not doing great. What Tyson's trying to do is streamline its costs in order to make it, try to make the results less volatile, maybe make the cost structure a little bit more variable. We'll hear about this a little bit more when they report, next week. And then what also goes into this is we're kind of at peak paranoia about AI taking jobs. And if there's been one company that's been vocal about automation, it's been Tyson. Now, I don't think this is related to that, even though on the surface you might say, well, the company is investing heavily in automation, is cutting jobs, but they're cutting corporate jobs. The jobs they're trying to automate are things like cutting meat, deboning chicken, certain types of packaging processes that are manual that they're trying to have machines do. So I don't think it goes into that, but it also ties into what we hear from Anthony so often talk about how the jobs that are being eliminated in the economy tend to be good jobs, and the jobs where there still needs to be workers are kind of lower paying, more menial jobs. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's true with Tyson, and that's maybe why I was surprised that a headline of a Tyson job cut was true, because they've done so much to try to make themselves an attractive employer, but it's really kind of this mismatch of the people they had and the people they need.
How much of input and transportation costs have really gone into messing with kind of Tyson and the way that the other meat processors have had to operate these last few years? Obviously, food for their live animals, grain costs have gone up, and we've also seen maybe some tougher if they're using bulk carloads to transport their grain from places to their processing plants. Is that something that they're having to deal with as well?
Yes, although those issues aren't as bad as they were. Early in the pandemic, they were very bad. I think the biggest thing that happened there was not with Tyson specifically. It was a competitor, Foster Farms, who wasn't able to get the feed for their chickens, and they made a big deal about it. They were going to have to euthanize all these chickens prematurely if they didn't get the feed. And so Surface Transportation Board issued an emergency order for Union Pacific to move the chicken feed immediately, which was a very unusual step. I think it was an unprecedented step. So they've had those type of transportation issues, certainly. But really the bigger issue has been not having the workers during the pandemic. Really a lot of their sort of rank and file workers use their stimulus checks as a reason to not show up to work. Sometimes it was just absenteeism. They didn't even tell everyone they weren't going to show up. They just didn't show up. So the companies tried to make it, try to figure out what the sticking points are. If it's transportation, we'll try to arrange some transportation for you. If it's childcare, in some places they've had on-site kind of childcare. Just they try to do certain creative things to have the workers show up. But it's still, I think, an issue for them.
Definitely there. So, of course, Mike, you've got the Stock Out show that comes up later today. Well, what have you got coming up in the newsletter this week?
Yeah, still going through a lot of the earnings. Just had Unilever report last week. Results look good there. Really, they've looked good for most CPGs, let's say, outside of meat. So, I think there's still, a lot to talk about, there.
All right.